Maybe I want like this look like let's close the music. Did I already do that? I already did that. Look at me. All right, let's get started. Radical and sexual demonizing in the United States usually obscures the fact that violence against women is most often perpetuated by men from their own ethnic groups. The state promotes law and order campaigns that instruct people, especially women, to acquiesce to state policing efforts, including extra-legal or previously illegal police procedures, as the only recourse to countering sexual violence and criminality. The state, therefore, is called on to police angry men who create epidemics of sexual violence, including rape, incest, spousal and partner battery, and murder. Annually, 4 to 6 million women are battered by current or former husbands or partners. 52% of female murder victims are unalived by intimate partners. 23% of pregnant women seeking prenatal care have been battered. More African American women, quote, are injured by husbands, lovers, and friends than by car accidents, rapes, muggings combined. While spousal abuse accounts for 50% of African Americans' self-unalivement. According to the Uniform Crime Report, UCR, in 1991, there were 106,593 rapes in the United States, 292 a day, 12 in an hour, one every 5 minutes. From 1972 to 1991, the numbers of reported rape increased 128%. A National Crime Victimization Survey gives higher statistics than those cited by the UCR. 171,420 reported rapes from 1991, or 469 a day, 19 an hour, one every 3.5 minutes. Most rape victims now know their assailants. The majority of victims or survivors are youth. A National Woman Study from the Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center in 1992 reports that in 29% of forcible rapes, the victim is less than 11 years old, and in 32% between the ages of 11 and 17. With one in 6 rapes reported to the police. This study estimates that over a 20-year period, more than 12 million women became rape survivors in a society where only 1 in 100 rapists received more than a 1-year prison sentence for his crime. 1/4 of all convicted rapists are released on probation without serving any sentence. Once one is hard pressed to know how to discourage and diminish violence in the United States when elected officials condemn it while simultaneously applauding its use by certain sectors of the population. For instance, consider the culture war. In June 1995, it was considered to be a bold move when Republican presidential candidate and Senator Majority Leader Bob Dole denounced a, quote, cultural corporate, end quote, industry for extolling and romanticizing violence in Hollywood films and misogyny in gangster rap. Senator Dole's list of wholesome, quote, family films, however, included True Lies, which features prominent Republican donor Arnold Schwarzenegger, mass unalivings of Arabic terrorists, quote unquote, and Oscar-winning Forrest Gump, Horatio Algier story of an earnest, IQ-challenged white male in a period film that ridicules Vietnamese veterans against the war, anti-war activists, and Black Panther Party, and students for the Democratic Society. Dole's criticism was his pledge as a candidate to stem the rise of violence and sexual decadence by demanding a censorship of images and lyrics. Yet at the same time, the presidential contender celebrated violence and sexual decadence in images of state employees. The hero in True Lies is a CIA operative who I gotta look up this word. Hold on a second, everybody. It was resuscitate. Resuscitates his love for his wife by recruiting her as a spy who role plays as a hooker. In contrast, Dole lambasted Oliver Stone and Quentin Tarantino for productions of violence by non-state employees, or worse still, violence directed against state employees. Tarantino's successful Pulp Fiction also glamorized the racialized violence by suggesting that intermingling with black people increases the possibility of excitement for white people and promises opportunities for the expression of white humanity and self-restraint. Like the sentence culture critics, the court seems similarly befuddled by society's camouflage of rage, violent death, and madness. Consider the cases of a black unaliver, Colin Ferguson, and a white unaliver, William Masters. Ferguson was apprehended in 1993, Long Island Railroad shooting that left 6 people unalived and 19 wounded. He left handwritten notes listing the reasons for his assault as, quote, hatred for white people, Asian people, Hispanic people, and I cannot say that, but uncle, you know what? The presiding judge allowed Ferguson, who maintained that a white man had committed the shooting after taking the weapon from Ferguson's bag, to represent himself, although the psychiatrist testified at the competency hearing that Ferguson was delusional, paranoid, and mentally incompetent to stand trial. Ferguson had refused an insanity plea, and a dismissal, and dismissed his counsel, including the late civil rights attorney and human rights activist William M. Kunstler, who advocated either that one word or a, quote, black rage defense, which in fact were one of the same. The black rage defense was based on an argument that the radical oppression Ferguson experienced as a black Jamaican immigrant to the United States has driven him wildly. They used the INSAN word. The same month of Ferguson's February 17th, 1995 conviction of Minnelolia, New York, William Masters recorded the license plate number of the vehicle of 2 Chicano youths he had seen spray painting a highway underpass in Los Angeles. There we go. After the youth approached him, he shot both in the back, unaliving one, maintaining that he had been threatened for documenting their disfacement of public property, referring to the young men using racial slurs and blaming what he referred to as their, quote, negligent, quote, end quote, mothers for the shootings. Masters, who was not licensed to carry a concealed weapon, was released after 6 hours of police questioning. He was later heralded as a vigilante hero in Simi Valley, the site of the police acquittal in the Rodney King beating case. What is baffling is the construction of race, criminal violence, and sanity in these two cases is how the state ruled that Masters' act was self-defense rather than racially out of your mind or illegal, while decreeing that Ferguson's unalivings and behavior, clinical signs of mental instability, were sane. Where do we stand amid the contradictory anti-violence stance in the United States? After April 19, 1995, bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, Latino gang members took up collections to help survivors. George Bush policy gave up his National Rifle Association (NRA) life membership during his May 1995 commencement speech at William and Mary College, denouncing NRA rhetoric that depicted agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm as, quote, thugs or stormtroopers. That same month, his son, Texas Governor George W. Bush, signed legislation that legalized the carrying of concealed weapons. Just as state responses to criminal or vigilante violence foretell an arbitrary, almost whimsical standard of anti-violence enforcement, state depictions of terrorism function to absolve the United States of any responsibility for terrorist activities while radicalizing the domestic and foreign terrorists of Black and Arab people. Arab American Institution's President James Songbai condemned the scapegoating of Arab Americans immediately following the Oklahoma City bombing by citing FBI reports that of the 169 incidents of terrorism within the United States since 1982, 3 were committed by Arab people and 16 by Jewish extremists. For Zagbagi, the cottage industry, quote unquote, of the, quote, terrorist specialist was largely responsible for the racist stereotype circulating in the media concerning the initial suspect. Yet, the cottage industry was racializing terrorism, also used state employees. On a McNeil/Leather NewsHour segment, Senator John Kerry, Democrat from Massachusetts, cited the Black Panthers, not the Weathermen or other white militant leftists or rightist groups that conducted bombing attacks in the 1960s and early 1970s as a prototype for the Oklahoma City bombing. Senator Kerry's conflation of revolutionary and counter-revolutionary violence, positing that right-wing violence flows from left-wing violence and that the only law-abiding state provides sanctuary, ignores the fact that the Black Panthers were never convicted of the bombing, although criminal charges were made and have been linked to the FBI harassment of the Black Panthers under COINTELPRO. Revising history seems as prevalent as advocating for the right to violence or the right to bear arms. Armed resistance or revolutionary violence is advanced by those who do not trust the state to wield violence on their behalf or who fear the state's violence against them. What is usually lost in the simplistic dichotomies of and conflation of revolutionary and counter-revolutionary violence is how the state might facilitate political violence while criminalizing and condemning it. Anti-immigrant sentiments feed violence, international white supremacist movements. The hate movement of Europe set standards for U.S. adherents to follow. On the internet, one can find recruitment material for white supremacists, as well as snuffy pornography. The militant movement is the fastest growing component of white supremacist groups, with reportedly 4 times the number of members as the KKK and neo-Nazi combined in 1995. At a time when racist organizations and assaults on feminist and civil rights activists seem to be increasing, the rights of violent groups, such as the KKK, are affirmed by the Supreme Court, interpreting the Klan cross as an expression of religious speech. Many of us are familiar with the cross, particularly a burning one, as representing another form of speech. The Supreme Court ruled on January 29, 1995, that the KKK could not be barred from displaying a large cross alongside a Christmas tree and a menorah in front of the Columbus, Ohio courthouse. Paradoxically, while enforcing the rights of hate groups known for terrorism, the highest judiciary branch established the state as the protector from the violent, the criminal, and terrorists. Violence is both intoxicating and sobering. In American culture, often implicit responses to great demonstrative emotion. The National Memorial Service for the victims of Oklahoma City bombing, for example, combined state progenitor. I gotta look up this word, everybody. I gotta look at it. Hold on. Pageantry, an elaborate ceremony. Pageantry and patriotism. In its closing moment, in which a black woman gave a rousing rendition of God Bless America with an immense U.S. flag in the background, most mourners in the hall stood and wept. But political violence also inspires response of irrational justification with little or no remorse. For instance, Tom Metzger, a national white supremacist spokesperson, informed the press days after the Oklahoma City bombing that although the deaths were tragic, the federal government was responsible because it had placed a daycare center in the same building that housed the federal bureau. Can I finish the sentence real quick?
Yes.
That housed the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the FBI.
I helped clean that up and put bodies back together from that.
Thank you. In Metzger's mind, the government was presumably at fault for placing civilians, quote, in the line of fire, end quote, of military targets. In contrast, rather than rationalize the bombing, spokesmen for Indianapolis Black Panther militia, unaffiliated with the Black Panther Party, identified the hierarchy of black lives, argued that for African Americans, the death of Ethiopians from famine and war should have more significance than Oklahoma City's black victims who worked in the federal building for an oppressive state. Conclusion. And this is the conclusion of the introduction. Growing up on an army post with their military memorials and rituals, including the disappearance of fathers from our duty and training, I was constantly reminded of the use of coercion in policies, implementation, and patriarchal nationalism to provide the glue of civilian acquiescence in state violence in a democracy. Having survived a parent who toured in Korea and Dominican Republic and Vietnam, one who returned in altered state, never spoke about his war experience, and died embittered even after attaining his covenant rank of lieutenant colonel. I listened with particular attentiveness to retired general and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Colin Powell's September 18, 1995 interview with Terry Gross on National Public Radio's Fresh Air program. Promoting his autobiography and possible presidential bid, Powell parried Gross probes into his feelings about fighting in Vietnam, while black people in the civil rights movement fought Bull Connor, water hoses, and attack dogs as they try to desegregate Birmingham, Alabama. Vietnam was a war. Gross reminded Powell that Martin Luther King Jr. had condemned. The retired general first stated that he considered the war an ill-conceived one against nationalists rather than the Soviet-backed communist movement. Propagandists had portrayed it as the latter. He then talked about coming from a proud line of, quote, Buffalo soldiers, end quote, and learned to show gratitude for black people who served in the U.S. military so that he could benefit from the build on their path-breaking contributions as Americans and men who insisted on racial equality. Although I also appreciate the Tuskegee Airmen and other black servicemen and women and come from a, quote, a shorter or less illustrious line of military careerists, Powell's uncritical use of the term Buffalo Soldiers, a term for African American soldiers that comes from the Native Americans who were dispossessed of their lands by the U.S. Deployment of cavalry, including these black troops after the Civil War, leaves me disappointed in that this so-called independent political response offers for democratic anti-violent societies. Powell's stance is not surprising. Even that career militarists employed to implement war policies usually mute or veil their sentiments about the rights of colonized people to self-determination and the importance of restricting U.S. violence and domination. If by chance they even acknowledge the subaltern peoples have such rights. Occasionally, even militarists, though only a few, boldly denounce U.S. military intervention in posters displayed at the UN Church Center and declaration of Marine Commander General David M. Shoup made on May 14th, 1966, so dissimilar to those of Colin Powell, condemned U.S. aggression. Here's what he said, or they said. I believe that if we had and would keep our dirty, bloody, dollar-soaked fingers out of the business of these nations, so full of depressed, exploited people, they will arrive at the solution of their own. And if unfortunately their revolution must be of a violent type because the haves refuse to share with the have-nots by any peaceful method, at least what they get will be their own and not the American style, which they don't want, and above all don't want crammed down their throats by Americans. 30 years later, there is a considerable skepticism, cynicism, and wariness felt about the possibilities of revolution and violent liberation struggles. There is less cynical skepticism and political exhaustions about de-escalating violence in U.S. policies. In our confrontation with violence, survival, staying emotionally, intellectual, and physically alive despite abuse is a considerable achievement for many. going beyond their survival and speculate about liberation. However, reassisting state violence details and expands on progressive radicalism. Yeah, I always mess up radicalism and racialism and racial. I gotta remember it's a D. In its discussion of race, sex, class, and violence, the objective of this book has been summed up by one critic's observation. It informs a society in which, quote, most Americans don't have a clue about the depths and scope of widespread violence, and its moves beyond the headlines of sensationalist crime reports. It is also a, quote, gift back to those who teach about risk-taking, political thinking, and actions while exemplifying, quote, sustained resistance, end quote, the ability to struggle for democratic ideas without having interminable battles penetrate one's own core. Admittedly, there are many forms of resistance to violence. These reflections selectively recall various political experiences with differing emphasis. Still, these fragments are useful, for they contextualize and decode political events and ethical response to violence. And in so doing, they frame a resistance by critiquing and documenting confrontations. Despite ironic cruelties and contradictions, battles for democratic power create movements of beauty and integrity that coincide with the ugliness of struggle. Reacting to violence in America, domestic and foreign policies, and cultural practices with more than outrage and despair. We may take heart from, hold on guys, Gertrude Stein's observation. And here this person is. You always have in your writing the resistance outside of you and inside of you, a shadow upon you, and the thing which you must express. In the beginning of your writing, this struggle is too tremendous that the result is ugly. The person who has made the fight probable makes it seem ugly. It is ugly, but the essence of that ugliness is the thing which always makes it beautiful. I myself think it is much more interesting when it seems ugly, because in it you see the element of the fight. And that's the end. Because so much of what is unpleasant, ugly, or unruly in our lives centered on violence and its manifestations in poverty, racism, sexism, and heterosexism, anti-Semitism, and militarism. The following essays are obviously not pretty misusing on resistance. Most radicalism that counters institutionalized poverty, hate crimes, post-colonial imperialism cannot be pretty, or expressed in the niceties of civility. Still encourage and integrity in confronting violence frame the ugliness of the battles, to the extent that resisting state violence goes beyond literary insurgency or rhetorical resistance to bring the element of the fight into our daily lives with the specificity of political struggles around economic, sexual, and racial violence. And it offers something of a beauty of resistance. Now we're on chapter 1, everybody. Yay, chapter 1. And chapter 1 says erasing technical.
Do you want me to just interrupt when you mess up on a word, or do you want me to just wait until you ask for help?
I'll wait till I ask for help, if that's okay.
Okay.
Also, Boop.
Hey, Boop. Real quick, we'll put this up real quick while I read the next paragraph. Just for you. Chapter 1,
Okay.
Erasing the Spectacle of Racialized State Violence. Our society is one not of spectacle, but of surveillance. We are neither in the amphitheater nor on the stage, but in a I don't know this word.
Panoptic.
Panoptic. Let's look that up. Panoptic.
Looking upwards with communists.
Let me get this back here. Hold on a second. I must go this real quick, and I must do this. The FX. Panoptic. Showing or seeing the whole at one view. There we go.
Well, it's like panoramic. Panoramic is the big long. Panoptic is at one go.
Nice. Come on. Here we go. All right. Medicine and a pump of sovereignty. The necessarily spectacular manifestations of power were extinguished one by one in the daily exercise of surveillance. Michael Foucault, Discipline and Punishment, The Birth of the Prison. Michael Foucault's Discipline and Punishment offers a body politics of state punishment and persecution and prosecution that is considered by some postmodernists to be the master narrative competent to critique contemporary state policing. Yet this particular work contributes to the erasure of racist violence in respect to U.S. policing and punishment. The meta-narrative of discipline and punishment vanquished historical and contemporary racialized terror, punishment, and control in the United States. It therefore distorts and obscures violence in America in general. By examining erasure in body politics, lynching and policing, penal executions and torture, the terror in U.S. foreign policies, issues that Foucault overlooked in his discussion of the history of policing in the United States, we find visceral spectacles of state abuse, erasure in body politics. Did I get that right? Is it erasure?
Yes, you did.
Thank God. Also, writing about the disappearance of torture as a public spectacle, quote unquote, with no reference to its continuity in European and American colonies where it was inflicted on indigenous peoples in Africa and the Americas. Foucault waves a historical perspective that eventually presents the contemporary, quote, Western state as a non-practitioner of torture. This text illustrates how easy it is to erase the specificity, I can't say that, the specificity of the body and violence while centering discourse on them, losing sight of the violence practiced by and in the name of the sovereign who at times was manifested as part of the dominant race. Foucault universalized the body of the white propertied male. Much of the discipline and punishment depicts the body with no specificity tied to racialized and sexualized punishment. The resulting veneer of bourgeoisie respectability painted over state repression. Italy's what is that word?
It leads.
It leads racist violence against black and brown and indigenous bodies. Foucault, they used the color, the starts there. Foucault states that the historical moment of the disciplines was the moment when an art of the human body was born. 173. I don't know why they did that. Failing to concretize this, quote, art of the human body, end quote, he leaves unaddressed these questions. Which body serves as prototype? Who bore this representative model or type? Ostensibly talking about the body while ignoring its uniqueness, Foucault explores issues of policing that are restricted to behavior. If one asserts that the, quote, introduction of the biographical is important in history of penalty because it establishes the, quote, criminal as existing before the crime and even outside it, end quote. One might also note that the biographical is intricately tied to the biological, that is the, quote, criminal. It is identified not only by his or her act, but also by his or her appearance. Consider how Foucault's discussions of nonconformity as offense mask the body. And I think this is him. What is specific to the disciplinary penalty is non-observance, that which does not measure up to the rule that departs from it. The whole definite domain on the non-conforming is punishable. The soldier committing an offense, quote unquote, whenever he does not reach the level required. A pupil's quote unquote offense is not only a minor infraction, but also an inability to carry out his task. Non-observance and non-conformity are often understood as biologically determined, even given at the departure from the norm shows up not only in behavior, but usually in terms of physical characteristics that are racialized. Foucault's exclusive focus on actions suggests indifferentiated bodies. Physical appearance, however, can be considered an expression of either conformity or rebellion, because some bodies fail to conform. Psychologically, different bodies are expected and are therefore required to behave differently under the state or police gaze. Greater obedience is demanded from those whose physical difference mark them as aberrational. What is it?
Aberrational, like
What's
an
that mean?
aberration. Something that is different.
Okay. Offensive or threatening. Conversely, some bodies appear more docile than others because of their conformity in appearance to idealized models of class, color, and sex. Their bodies are allowed greater leeway to be self-policed or policed without physical force. To illustrate, a white male executive in an Armenian suite is considered more docile, civiled, and
Armani.
What? Armani, thank you. Civiled and indeed of less invasive, cohesive policing than a black male youth in a hooded sweatshirt and off the baggy pant jeans. In contrast, white youth are racially cross-dressed with baseball caps turned backwards, X, t-shirts, low-riding pants, are generally not aggressively targeted by police, not distinguished between fashion, consumerism, and racial membership. Noting now physique is, constructed as a marker for deviance and criminality. Frantz Fanon writes in, quote, The Black and Psychopathology, that the, quote, black people symbolize a biological danger. To suffer from the phobia of blackness is to be afraid of the biological. To fear the black is to fear the body. Conversely, to revere the black is to idealize the body. Foucault writes a social fear and policing that are reflected in binary division and branding, which produce a polarized social entities of the, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this without saying these, so everybody forgive me. Mad / insane, dangerous / harmful, normal / abnormal. This cohesive.
No, you missed it. It's mad / sane, dangerous / harmless, normal / abnormal.
This cohesive assessment of labeling, categorizing the identifying places the individual under, quote, constant surveillance. Foucault, however, makes no mention of sexual and racial binary oppositions to designate social inferiority and deviance as biological inscribed on the bodies and non-males or non-whites. Therefore, when he reports in Discipline and Punish that, quote, the mechanism of power, end quote, are organized, quote, around the abnormal individuals to brand him and to alter him, end quote. Racial and sexual issues are invaded. To write that these mechanisms of dominance rely on a I don't know what this word is. I'm gonna look it up.
It's called panopticism.
Yeah. All right, let's look it up. I have it. A concept describing a social control mechanism where individuals regulate their own behavior because they feel they are constantly being wretched, even if they are not.
Watch.
Yeah. Produces by the disciplinary and exclusionary practice of the, quote, arrest of the plague and the, quote, exile of the leper, with which for Foucault respectively represent the dreams of a, quote, disciplinary society and a, quote, peer community, without considering the role of race in the formation of that disciplined society and peer community, to see the United States through blinders. In racialized societies such as the United States, the plague of criminality, deviance, immorality, and corruption is embodied in the black because both sexual and social pathology are branded by skin color, as well as by gender and sexual orientation, where the plague of the leper are codified in the black. For instance, the dreams and desires of a society and state will be centered on the control of the black body. Binary.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Every time it says the black, I think they're talking about the black person, the black people.
I think they're also talking about the concept of black.
I got an important thing to say. I gotta go sleepy time, but thank you everybody for the gifts.
All right, you're welcome. Good night.
Good night. Good night.
All right, you're gonna say the next word: binary, opposition, and
Panopticism.
yes, will thereby be racialized. The binary opposition, anti-black racism, has played a crucial historical role in rationalizing and inverting hierarchies of the oppressors and oppressed. Crazy, sorry, I said C word, slash sane, dangerous, slash harmless, and normal slash deviant. Foucault ignores this phenomenon, while other theorists such as Frantz Fanon and Sander Gilman explore it. Panopticism, can't say it, opticism, and the other
Well, it's easy. It's
not easy. If it was easy, I would be able to say it better. It's not easy for me. Sorry, just not. I have a hard time saying it. I can't say it. In the policing, gays are also informed by racial and sexual bias. The tools of observation and examination that Foucault delineates are constructed within worldviews influenced by racial and sexual mythologies and political ideologies that guide carceral testing. Foucault's carceral refers to the network of why can I never do these? I keep wanting to say regimentation.
Regimentation.
Let's find out. Regimentation and discipline. Yes, thank you. A person without walls, in turn, made up a social networks of surveillance, ignoring disenfranchised ethnic minorities policed by both the state and dominant castes. Foucault produced his own binary division in Discipline and Punish. He reproduces the split between the public and private realms and masks its dualism by obscuring the private realm and the bodies policed there, those of gay men, lesbian, bisexuals, and the poor, women, children, and people of color. Their disappearance or theoretical erasure allows for the representative body, which Foucault based on a white male model, to appear as universal. This mismeasure of man, naturalized and universalized as a masculine and European shade, disciplined and punished color, and gender blind investigation, for instance. Foucault's acquisitionally male military model.
Quintessentially.
Yeah, male and military model that is premised on the inequality marked only by rank achieved through individual merit. His assumptions of false equality preempt decisions of racial violence. Historically, discipline and punishment within households and slave quarters and their post-industrial manifestations of domesticated or rebellious children, women, servants, and their incarcerated reveal new dimensions of dominance and terror. Within the private realm or underground economy of prisons or workfare, different forms of punishment with more intensive violence emerge. If the, quote, art of punishment in the regime of disciplinary power, end quote, is designed not to expiate or repress, but to normalize, quote unquote, as Foucault argues, then one must recognize that some bodies cannot be normalized no matter how they are disciplined, unless the prevailing social and state structures that figuratively and literally rank body disintegrate. Under Nazi Germany, those designated biologically abnormal, the handicapped body, the gay body, the Jewish body, the is that Romani people? Romani bodies, the communists, the socialist body, and the black body were to be sterilized, euthanized, eradicated, considered defective, or a subspecies of humans. They could not be normalized under state ideology. The political function of the term normal structures hierarchy while masking exclusion through the projection of illusory objective norms. For Foucault, quote, it was no longer the attack on the common interest, it was a departure from the norm, end quote, that constitute threat. The, quote, social enemy of transformed into a deviant who brought with him the multiple dangers of disorder, crime, and wildness. The normalization process is itself constricted and disciplined by the imaginary of the norm, the white, male, propertied heterosexual, where the criminal are the wild, is constructed as belonging to another race. A black criminal, a mad woman, is doubly offensive, marked by behavior and biology that diverge from the norm. Although Foucault critiques Cesar Manuel de Lombroso racist criminology, he does not utilize anti-racist or critical race theory. In this construction of the unspecified body, Foucault is unable to sanitize state repression, as he argues that manifestations of power or spectacles of violence have been extinguished. In the United States, however, they are held to reserve where the threat of and promise of state violence makes surveillance effective. The complexity of the criminalization of people of color, their skin, people, because we have to say that, because they're talking about specifically that the skin is based on the United States and the white supremacist system is the destructiveness of gang members who neither perceive themselves nor are portrayed as members of society, and defunding of youth centers, Foucault's incarcerals, end quote, for prison construction, and the ethnically and sexually marked bodies for state violence in domestic and foreign policies. None is analyzed by Foucault. One might find that one of us are further from the perfect camp, quote unquote, in which, quote, all power would be exercised solely through exact observation, and where, quote, each gaze would form a part of the overall functions of power, end quote. Then Foucault emanates this, quote, extract observation, end quote, is enforced by the threat of violence administered by the state, with poor people and people of color as the most vulnerable targets. The violent state punishments that Foucault generalizes as a past phenomenon resurface in our postmodern era policies. Lynching and policing. What are we at? All right, cool. This is a hard book to read. It's not like it's hard. It's very like technical and stuff. It's a little like, this is very good. This is, well, all right. Lynching and policing. At the beginning of the 19th century, we learned from discipline and punishment with penal reforms, quote, the tortured, dismembered, amputated body, symbolically branded on the face or shoulders, imposed unalive, alive or dead, to public view, end quote, fade as public spectacles. And with it, the, quote, body is a major target of penal repression disappeared, end quote. Yet, during the 19th century, the tortured, amputated body existed For example, in the frames of the Senegalese and the enslaved Martinicans under French colonial rule. Even in the post-emancipation era, the brutalized body appears. For instance, in the United States, from the end of the Civil War until the mid-20th century, the punished, mangled body was in visceral marked of the ritualized barbarism of lynching. The conversions of mob and sheriff oversaw the branding, dismemberment, black body that symbolized the rage of vindication of the prosecuting crowd, the prosecuting crowd, and state so-called redressing white victimization. In the synonym of blackness with violence in U.S. society, the specter of lynching appears as a repression of American rage and retribution. Ironically, the black, the historical victim of state violence through slavery and Reconstruction with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan and Jim Crow laws, was portrayed as the aggressor. The age
Can I
of
say it
survival.
again?
What's up?
Again, even in that sentence, it was the black man, the historical victim of state violence through slavery. I think it's supposed to be the black man.
Okay. The age of sobriety. I think what she's trying to do is trying to understand that that word that has been given to those people is the body that they're talking about. So that's what I think it is, but I get what you're saying. The age of sobriety surrounding punishment that Foucault claims began around 1830 is belied by the giddy hysteria, wildness of lynching that became racialized and increased in numbers after the Civil War. Curiously, ahistorically, Foucault argues that the disappearance of punishment as a spectacle, quote unquote, highlighted a shift to a more covert, systematic application of punishment and incarceration, in which the very absence of overt state violence led to a mollification of the mobs and crowds that previously witnessed the spectacles as active audiences. Quote, it was as if the punishment was thought to equal, if not to exceed the S words, the brutality, I'll say, the crime itself, to accustom the spectators to a ferocity from which one wished to divert them, to show them the frequency of crime, to make the executioner resemble a criminal. Judges, schmurderers, to revise roles at the last moment.
Reverse roles.
Thank you. The last moment, to make the tortured criminal an object of pity or admiration. African American lynch victims, however, were rarely transformed into objects of pity or admiration in the dominant society. Although among anti-lynching advocates, they were mourned and eulogized rather than the erasure of bodily torture for the incarceral of self-policing citizens. As Foucault maintains, punitive torture in the United States becomes inscribed by the black body. Antebellum lynching victims were predominantly white, and the 300 recorded lynchings between 1840 and 1860s, only 10% of the victims were African American. In the postbellum era, when the majority of lynching victims were black, tortured, mutilation, dismemberment, and castration, as well as the pickling of body parts as souvenirs, became regular features of lynching. Lynching did not disappear as state-sanctioned mass phenomenon until the 1920s and 1930s. The Southern Poverty Law Center, Klan Watch, Project documents their continuance of clandestine atrocities. The Commission of Interracial Cooperations 1933 study of lynching in the 1930s reports that most astute, is that right? Astute, anti-racist.
Astute.
No, I got it right. Cool. Anti-racist and Black Americans at the time already knew the death of the victims was not a primary motive in lynching. The prevalence of torture and mutilation established lynching as a terrorist campaign to control an ethnic people, subjugate as an inferior race. Lynching was not only a form of punishment for criminal assault and theft, as well as infractions such as economic competition with whites or simply being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but also the sadistic fixation on the body focus on the black body that fueled outrageous retribution. The tortured body as the quote major target of penal repression. Volkov, I think this is executed by the self-appointed lawmen and government employees, was often accompanied by the methodology and predatory black male sexual wildness directly against white females. So that, okay. Black women and girls were also lynched in the post-bellum era. Lynching violence, like police brutality, is usually associated with black male victims. For example, the Rodney King beating, which culturally functioned as a visceral spectacle of police racism, punishment, and torture. But men are not the only targets of police discipline. For years before what became a symbol of police racism and brutality through channels of as diverse as academic texts and urban riots, the Center of Law and Social Justice ensued in 1988 report, Black Women Under Siege by New York City Police, quote unquote, documenting white male police violence against black women, and the center contended that the police and legal system played an instrumental role in repressive violence and that racism often motivates police assaults. The report cites violent actions by white police, including intentionally driving a patrol car into a woman, beating a woman who had witnessed a police assault on an African American man, spraying mace into the face of a woman whose hands were cuffed behind her back, and pulling guns, pew-pews on the unarmed woman who, after admitting them into her home, asking why they were there. Few media and government officials focus on such violence, according to the center, quote, the massive coverage given in Taiwan Brawley case was disguised as the sape of police and racial attacks on black women in general. What's up?
The spate.
Spate, yeah. Creating the view that the deaths of Eleanor Bumbars and Yovan Smallwood are usually treated as isolated incidents rather than as part of a historical and recently increased trend. Is it Tijuana? Tawana Brawley's unsubstantiated accusations against white police and local officials for assault and rape are generally considered to be a hoax. Although African American teenagers' charges provide a springboard of her media, quote, handlers, in quote unquote, Al Sharpton, Alton Maddox, and Vernon Mason, Eleanor Bumpars, a 6-year-old arthritic, is that obese?
Yep, obese.
grandmother was unalived in her apartment in 1984 by a shotgun blast, as police attempted to evict her from non-payment of back rent because Bombars had brandished a kitchen knife at the white policeman who had broken down her apartment door. The unaliving was ruled as self-defense. Jesus. Yvonne Smallwood was an African and Caribbean woman beaten to death by police in 1988 after she told the officers ensuing a traffic ticket to her black male companion that they should be arresting drug dealers instead. No police were indicted for these similar deaths in cases such as that of graffiti artist Michael Stewart. The death of women in police custody by means of law enforcement measures a discipline and punishment in an issue rarely raised in feminist exploration of women and violence or masculinist exploration of racism and policing. Although these particular unalivings took place outside of public view, local police generally tend to turn surveillance into a spectacle. The use of crowd control and supervision of black areas illustrates this point. The protests in the wake of police acquittal of Rodney King's beating case nationwide, and majority of protesters and rioters were non-black, as well as during the days of outrage, were not what Foucault had in mind when he wrote the people were, quote, made to accept the power to punish, or quite simply, when punished, tolerate being so, end quote. In the mid-1980s, following the civil unrest of the days of outrage, New York police officers appeared at Brooklyn Grand Army Plaza on Labor Day during the Caribbean Carnival with the posture of quote, heavy manners. Floats and steel drums bands passed street dancers and vendors on Eastern Parkway, accompanied by a drone of police helicopters overhead. Any residents or visiting tourists on the street could look up at the roofs of the Brooklyn apartment houses lining the parade route and seeing uniformed police, including sharpshooters, with the butts of their rifles posed on their hips. The parade was to end officially at a certain hour. In the past, like other parades in the city, the last stragglers and revelers? I think it's revelers. Are you there? Could pack up and depart in the leisurely fashion. Okay, depart in the leisurely fashion.
You were right.
Okay, cool.
You were right, revelers.
Thank you. That year, however, police rode side by side on horseback, a solid wall of blue and white centurions, after the last float swept dancers, spectators, and walkers off the parkway. Not only those under surveillance, but the police themselves believed that black people had not accepted the state, quote, power to punish, with the tolerance that Foucault imagined. Although Foucault seems to suggest that there is little life outside the carceral and the state disagrees, as evident in its distrust of black people to regulate themselves in a police reliance on symbolic or real threats to discipline police black communities. The state assumptions are underscored by 1995 polls conducted during the O.J. Simpson trial, in which more black people than whites expressed uncertainty about Simpson's guilt. However, moreover, the August and September 1995 news coverage of retired Los Angeles Police Department police detective Mark Furman who in a taped interview boasted on his hatred for black people, anti-black harassment, and planting of evidence for indictments suggested that black people, as well as others, increasingly distrust the judicial system. A deeply spectacle and racist police beating, disciplining.
Deadly spectacle.
I said the deadly spectacles of a racist police beatings, disciplining poor, feminized, and people of color communities is overshadowed by more spectacular display of deadly state force. The 1985 police bombing and, oh my gosh, incineration of civilians? Is that right?
Yep.
Of civilians in a black